Hello there everyone, welcome back to another video about the One Piece card game. As you can tell by the title of this video, this is going to be a discussion about red and why I don't think this is necessarily a contentious opinion, but potentially some of you don't share it. I think it's pretty much undisputedly the best colour in the game. And this is at the time of OP2, and going into OP3, this even continues. So I will be discussing some OP3 cards in this video to kind of solidify my points and make it clear why we just see red dominating set after set after set. But before I get into it, I figured I would give some background as to the meta for those of you who potentially only started playing the game recently. And also, I would remind you, if you're enjoying these videos, to like them, subscribe to the channel to be notified whenever I do upload, and if you're interested in supporting the channel and also getting advanced copies of exclusive deck analyses and meta analyses and things like that, deck lists and all this sort of good competitive stuff, you can check out my Patreon linked in the description. At the moment, I have 3 OP2 guides on there. That is for Ivankov, Kinemon, and Whitebeard. The Whitebeard one is all the different builds, but you can expect more of those to be coming over the next few weeks as I continue to build out the roster of guides there for all of the major players in OP2. So if you're obviously interested in that, please do check that out. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and discuss a little bit of the meta history for One Piece. So the OP1 metagame, when we first had the format, Zoro seemed very, very oppressive. Now, the reason for that, I'm sort of going to go through all the leaders later anyway, but was because when a new card game starts, usually aggro is just very, very good. People have to understand how to play around it, people have to understand how to value certain things, and when it's okay to take damage, and there's all sorts of stuff where people are figuring out the game, and typically, like, okay, well, me turn card sideways, kill you, ends up being quite good, especially in context of red, which actually had cards with rush, which was fairly unique. Obviously, there was a couple in purple, but like by and large, it was pretty much just red's whole thing. They had 2 very, very good cards, 3 actually, I suppose, very, very good cards with rush. So obviously you had that, Zoro took over, and then people learned the game and people got better, and we saw, in the West, we saw Doffy seeing a lot of play, but it didn't really see play in Japan because it hard lost to Green. Purple had Kaido, which was pretty good in OP1. Green, of course, had Kid, which was ended up being relatively uncontroversially the best deck in the game, tied with Law. But also, Kid pretty much had a very rough matchup into red Luffy. So what you had was people switching from this aggressively, very, very aggressive early game deck in Zoro, which didn't really have the consistency tools yet to make it very, very, very scary. And it was something that you could, if the odds of bricking were fairly high, it's something you wouldn't necessarily want to take to a tournament because you could defend against it. And of course, the best deck in the meta had a pretty reasonable matchup into it in Kid, into a more mid-range deck in red Luffy, which hit bigger numbers and was just generally a lot more threatening. And because it played in that mid to late game and had more time to actually see its pieces, that ended up kind of swapping the better red players swapped into red Luffy, or they swapped into Law, which of course, Law's a whole other can of worms, which we won't necessarily get too deep into, but I think Law's probably the best leader in the game in terms of longevity. I just don't see it going away anytime ever. But of course, the point of that was to say that we started off in a position where red was kind of already top tier, in a situation where blue certainly wasn't, and purple arguably was, though obviously in the English format we were missing the film starter deck, which would have elevated purple to definitive top tier. But definitely there was a triangle meta at the very top, where one of them at least was red. You included Law, and there was 2, and you could arguably include Zoro, and certainly Zoro was in the top half of the decks in the game, and I wouldn't say it was worse than tier 2. So you've already got basically every single red leader in the game as a sort of, viable at the bare minimum. Now we move into OP2. And the meta has shifted even more towards red. Blue got Ivankov. Ivankov is much better than Doffy. Doffy kind of fell off. Ivankov's better, but Ivankov kind of loses to some of the best, basically all the best decks. We got black, which loses to red. We got, in purple, we got Magellan, who loses to a lot of things. In green, we got Kinemon, which of course ran around, taking over after the dominance of Zoro. And red, we had Zoro, that's still very viable, and in fact one of the best decks in the game. Basically trading places with Luffy. Luffy, still very viable, maybe more of a tier 2, tier 1.5 contender. Law, incredibly viable. And of course we've got Whitebeard as a new leader who is insanely viable, and is currently running basically every American tournament. Like the most recent one, the entire top 4 were playing Whitebeard. So you have to, at a certain point, you sit back and go, this is interesting. Why is red so good? And then looking forward into OP3, again, one new leader in Ace. The entire format of OP3 is pretty much red with a little bit of black, and now that they banned the best card for Whitebeard, a little bit of yellow. But before that, it was just red. You played Whitebeard, and Lucci was your best off-meta counter, maybe Nami. Basically, you just played Whitebeard. So we've had 3 sets in a row of red being a tremendously dominant force in the game, and the question is why, I suppose, and that's what I want to hopefully answer in this video. What is it about red that just keeps it being up there as just this powerhouse color? So let's start off by going through the leaders and having a little discussion on why the leaders are just all so good. And this is in stark contrast to pretty much every other color. So I haven't got Garp up here. I should probably pull up Garp, but I'll pull up Garp here just to say Garp is the worst red leader outside of Uta, and Garp's not bad. But Garp definitely relies a lot more on the black tools to be broken, and say it definitely plays a lot more like a black deck than a red deck. But yeah, I mean Garp is, I would say, tier 2, and this is the worst red deck in the game. So I mean, if your worst is tier 2, then certainly that's pretty good. And I would also say, like, this is the typical dual color affair of like relatively not a super generic effect. It's pretty good, but yeah, anyway, let's go ahead and talk about Zoro. Why is Zoro so good? Because it's incredibly generic, right? This is all your characters gain plus 1k power. So this is just always going to be good, right? It turns your 1 Don into potentially significantly more than that, until we reach a point in the game where an extra 1k is really not meaningful, which I hope is not going to be for many years, if at all. I mean, I imagine we will reach the point where, 6k swings mean nothing, everything has a 2k counter, and at that point, yes, Zoro will not be valuable, but I do not see that happening for quite some time. And so until then, Zoro is always going to be valuable as just this thing that buffs up your power level. And even in the situation, by the way, when we do reach that point, well, presumably we'll also have moved to a situation where the vanilla standard for 3 costs will be 3/6 instead. And at that point, Zoro is still doing the exact same thing. So this is something that scales pretty much the entire length of the game. It's insanely generic. It's not restricted in any way. And that is sort of a key point what we're going to keep seeing with red leaders. If we look at lore here, I suppose probably been better to look at Luffy legs. If we look at Luffy, again, this is like a very, very generic effect. You take one of your Don and you just slap it on something. Again, incredibly generic, always going to be useful, especially if we start seeing, different Dons that do different things. But, even if we don't see that, we're still talking about this situation where, like, this is always going to be useful because you're always going to be able to sling power around. You're always going to be able to just get more out of your Don than any other deck is going to be able to. We see this exact same thing with Lore, right? Lore, fundamentally, you're paying 2 to get a 5 cost, right? You're getting a 3 cost discount, and as a result, this is an incredibly generic effect as well, right? It doesn't specify any attributes, doesn't specify nothing, it just says 1 costs into 5 or lower costs. So if we enter a meta where 4 costs are really, really busted and 5 costs suck, that's fine. Lore can still function with 4 costs, and nothing wrong with that. 3 costs even. And I think it's very unlikely that we're going to see a situation where 1 costs fall out of the format. If anything, we're going to just see 1 costs getting better and better and better and better. And Lore continues to be viable set after set after set after set because we continue to get these powerhouse 1 costs. If we look at the newer leaders, Whitebeard, this is a 6k base power, 6 life leader. That's very generic, actually. You can kind of play whatever shell you want with this guy. You don't necessarily have to play Whitebeard Pirates, but of course it gives you access to the Whitebeard Pirate powerhouse cards, which we will talk about more later. So you sit here and you go, okay, well, here's another really generic leader. It doesn't need a particular type, it doesn't need a particular anything, it just exists. And of course, to kind of finish this off here, this, again, Ace, very generic. It doesn't specify Whitebeard event, doesn't specify anything. It just says you ents or stages. And you get that versatility there in using them defensively or offensively. So it incentivizes you to build a certain way, increase the number of events or stages you have, but you don't even necessarily need to do that. This could potentially just be a nice to have. So you sit here and you go through the leaders, and you're in this situation where you go, okay, every single one of these is kind of generic, right? Like, none of these, a good comparison would be set 1 Doflamingo, right? That's not only requiring a large amount of Don, which might be not particularly viable later on in the game, it specifies an attribute. So you're always going to be locked in to something like that. We see this as like a major issue. Like, leaders which restrict themselves in any way to attributes are just ones that aren't going to last as long. But of course, as good as these, generic leader effects are, I think Kid has an incredibly powerful generic leader effect. So it's not like this alone is the reason that explains why red is so good. But when we look at the quality and quantity of specific types of support cards that red has gotten, we once again begin to understand why it's so good. So I think the biggest one that we need to talk about is the type of consistency tools that red has. So red has Nami, red has Curly Dadan, red has Izo. So what is so special about all of these types of cards here is that they are check top 5 on play, right? So you're getting the value immediately. They replace themselves in your hand immediately. You are not losing hand advantage by playing them. You are building a board for no reason, and, these scale well into the game because, when you have 8, 10 Don, it's actually very easy to slap 2 or 3 onto one of your units and turn them into attackers. And you've gotten value out of them, so they're replacing themselves. These are incredibly high value. If we contrast these with the kind of stuff that other decks get, right? If we were to look to blue has one of these in Buggy. That's it. Okay, let's look to purple. Well, purple has one of these in Buena Vista, but Buena Vista is a 2k, and you don't really have ways to return them to your hand in purple. So you're giving up a 2k counter to do a top 5 surge, which, don't get me wrong, top 5 surge is certainly good, but that's a bit shaky. You also have Hanyabal in purple, but that is restricted specifically to purple Impel Down. Purple Impel Down. If we go back and we take a look at what we were searching with these, Izo says any Whitebeard pirate other than itself. Any Whitebeard pirate. So it doesn't specify color, it doesn't specify card type. If we look at Curly Down, this has red 1 cost, so this is the most restricted, but it's any red 1 cost, so now we don't care about trait, right? So suddenly we have searches for other power cards at the 1 cost level. Nami is any Straw Hat. Any Straw Hat besides itself. So, you look into the quality of the search that red is getting, and it's just a cut above, right? This problem is exacerbated further in set 3. If we look at the searches that black gets top 3 searches. Top 3. Yellow gets a top 4 searcher, not a top 5, top 4. Green has the most comparable in Film Nami, but Film Nami only checks for the top 3, and it costs 1. Or we look at Momo. Momo's or Bonnie, the green searches are 1 to play, but then, and yes, they're, you can recur them, but you're never going to recur them because you pay 1 again, so they cost 2, and you have to tap them to check the top 5. And your opponent is never letting them live, ever. They're getting cleared. Like, unless your opponent literally cannot clear them, if you've got, it's possible they can't, but, it's very, very likely that they're just going to get dealt with. So we understand now that red has this disgusting quality of consistency, this disgusting quality of card advantage. These are incredibly powerful things, especially this early on in the game, when we don't have events that go, hey, search your deck for a specific thing. We don't have combo things. We don't have, these mechanics that, increase consistency by going into an extra deck, and then, we don't have none of this. None of this exists. It's set 3. It's set 2 in English. It's set 3. It's so early days that cards like this end up being insanely powerful in just letting you do your thing more often. So, but again, that wouldn't matter, right? Okay, we've got some generic leader effects and we got some consistency, but that doesn't really matter unless the things you're searching for are really, really good, right? For example, black is a great example. The things you're trying to search for in black are incredibly good, right? You're searching for the Admirals. These are crazy powerful cards. What are we searching for in red that's so good? Well, it turns out red is also searching for very, 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 very good things. This Luffy, for example, this completely ignores blockers. This has Rush. This is one of the most powerful cards in the game, very frequently slept on, an unbelievably powerful card. What other generic tools does red have? Well, we got Brook. This is an on-play that just slaps 2 dons around. It's a 2k counter, it's searchable. This is a very, very good card that sees play in a huge number of decks. It builds a board, it can become a 5k attacker itself very, very easily. It's a 2k counter if you just want to pitch it. Obviously in lore, this card is unbelievable. It's just a very, very good card. Zoro, this is a 7k swing for 1 Don, it's very efficient, and it's 6k on both turns. This is very, very powerful into things like Whitebeard. We keep going. These 2 Marcos are so powerful that they compensate for the rest of Whitebeard, pirate stuff, not being particularly good. And what's happened in Japan is Zoro players are just playing the Marco stuff. Because, hey, you know what? It turns out an on-play to pop a 3k or less is really, really good on a 6k body that can recur. And it turns out a 5k blocker that can recur is also really, really good, especially when both of such cards have counter in hand. So these are insanely good cards. And then, of course, we get the removal package that red has. We're talking about Otama. There's a 2k counter that subtracts minus 2k, which in and of itself is not necessarily particularly good, but then you combo that with, then you have to tuck into something, but you combo that with Jet Pistol. Suddenly you're killing anything with 8k or less. You combo this with Vista. On play, no interaction whatsoever. can come completely out of nowhere for 4 Don, bang, suddenly you have done 6k, and you've also developed a board a little bit. Robin on attack, it does the same thing. So we're talking about unbelievable levels of removal in comparison to everything else in the game. And of course, in terms of other generic power cards here, you got the Rush Sorrow and you got the Whitebeard. Like, these are all insanely generically useful cards that red has the consistency tools to just find. And I think this is one of my biggest problems with red. I don't necessarily have a problem with the game plan that red has, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with all these decks existing. I think the problem is that red just got way too much consistency way too fast. And what's happened as a result is the power cards that red gets aren't necessarily on a level higher than anything else in the game, right? Like, it's very difficult to look at the Ivankov-Luffy combo and say that isn't absolutely comparably powerful to playing a Whitebeard, right? Like, these are very, very powerful swing turns. These are huge, right? Like, you can't look at a 6-cost Sakazuki and go, well, that's weak. No, that's incredibly powerful. 4-cost Kuzan, 10-cost Kuzan, these are incredibly powerful cards. You can go to green, you can see the 8-cost Odin. This is an insanely powerful card. So what is it then that makes it feel so bad when it comes from red? And it's the fact that red has all this consistency. So whilst other decks are sitting there and potentially bricking, or in order to find their tools of making themselves vulnerable to you, at least dealing with their board in some capacity, right? Red is always able to develop a wide board, pretty much, like, unless, obviously you have to go out of your way to then interact with that board to use removal to deal with it, while simultaneously maintaining a hand advantage. The hand advantage they maintain is the best quality searches in the game that exist right now. And I haven't mentioned the event versions, by the way, because there's an event version for Storehouse, there's an event version for Whitebeards. You don't even play those, because they're literally not good enough by comparison. Other colours would probably kill for some of that. I'm telling you, if Black had had an event that searched for Navy, top 5 on an event, I'd played 4 copies of it. Give me that card. I need that. So you see what happens is this huge disparity in the consistency leads to the power cards in red coming out more often, coming out more consistently, and therefore red as a colour just being on this other level. And I don't know if set 4 is going to solve this. Of course, if you see the leaders we're getting in set 4, we're seeing other colours that largely are not red, of course. Well, we can talk about VV another time, but are getting some very, very interesting leader effects, but none of them are necessarily strictly like plussing leader effects, outside of, Rebecca. So, okay, potentially Rebecca might be the one color, like that this black-blue deck might be something that approaches the level of red consistency, especially if we're actually going to get some top searches for, that. I think the solution here is just to print more consistency for other colors, right? Like, I do feel like Bandai know they messed up with just how good the red consistency tools are, because they banned Moby Dick because they clearly just didn't process that, oh, you know what, turns out Ezo being able to get Moby Dick in Whitebeard, a little bit of a problem. And they realized they made a mistake, because in set 3, if you look at what this, so set 1, everything was a top 5 search. Everything was a top 5 search. Set 2, almost everything is a top 5 search, besides Nami, but Nami's a top 3 because it's an on-play and an on-attack, so you can kind of see the justification there, where they probably saw that top 5 was a little bit too good. They're like, okay, we'll make it a top 3. But everything else is a top 5, right? Like Buenafest is a top 5, Buggy's top 5, Hanyable's a top 5, so everything is a top 5. And then in set 3, you see they go, oh, we fucked up big time. These are way too good. This is way too consistent. So you start seeing them nerfing the consistency based on pretty much how powerful the cards you can get are, right? That's why Black having some of the best power cards in the game only gets to look at the top 3 cards, because we can't let Black look at the top 5. This is going to be way too good. And then, of course, Yellow, again, having some incredibly powerful cards, they only get to look at the top 4 to find those powerful cards. So, and I just feel like that's potentially not the solution, because you kind of open the floodgates and you're letting red just exist. And for that reason, I feel like red is always going to be running around until the other colors catch up in terms of the level of consistency, or you just give other colors cards that are so much more powerful that, okay, maybe I don't see it every game, or maybe I don't see it as consistently, but they're so good that, okay, maybe that makes up for it. Now, personally, I detest that school of thought. It's the same logic as why would you ban a card? Why don't you just limit it to 1? I think if you're talking about limiting a card to 1, you fundamentally misunderstand. Okay, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but in a lot of situations when people suggest, oh, why don't we limit this card to 1? For example, Moby Dick. People suggest, well, why don't you just limit it to 1? it gets removed, whatever. It makes it way less consistent. Nerfing consistency whilst leaving the power level the same is a horrible way to balance the game, because what happens is you just introduce this luck element into every single match now, where, okay, well, I'm going to play my Whitebeard deck exactly the same. Now I just have one Moby Dick. Maybe I'm just going to slap in some searches or some other consistency thing, some other draw power thing, whatever it is, just to dig to my Moby Dick faster. And now maybe in 40% less games, I don't see it, but in the remaining percentage of the games, the deck is just as oppressive because I saw the Moby Dick, right? And you see how that doesn't actually solve any problems whatsoever. All you do is make everyone feel even worse because you've clearly noticed it's a problem and decided to do the worst possible thing about it. I think if a card is a problem and there isn't a legitimately good reason to just reduce the number. Like, a good example is in Yu-Gi-Oh! The Destiny hero that banishes itself from grave and then special summons out another copy. That's one of the only sensible reduction in counts hits I've seen, because I'm like, no, that makes sense, because you're reducing the number of times you get to use that effect by reducing the count. You literally are making it be able to use one less time in isolation of all the other effects in Yu-Gi-Oh! So I think that for that reason, I think they've just got to own up to the fact that they've messed up with red, and just give everyone else the same level of consistency and the same level of draw power, and have that as the baseline, and then kind of go from there. I don't like the idea of just giving, black, yellow, insanely broken cards, but then being like, oh, well, maybe you don't see them so often. We will see what happens. They've printed a leader with a check top 2 effect every single turn. I guarantee you that deck is almost every single turn you're going to be going, yep, pay 1, check top 2. And that might be an issue. We'll find out. I don't know. What do you guys think? Have I rambled way too long about red just being a broken color? Am I just a salty guy? Not really, as you can see from my playset binder over there. I've got a playset of every card in this game, so I'll just play what's good. As in a tournament setting, so I don't really care that it's necessarily red that I'm going to be playing. But I do think that Bandai have really messed up on this one, and they need to own up to that fact, and they just need to print cards of the same quality of consistency for all these other colors. Or I guess the other option is just move right away from the cards with the current broken consistency tools and move them into something else. Though I do feel like that's going to be really difficult to do, because they led with Nami and Straw Hat Pirates, and unless they are going to change it to Straw Hat Alliance or something, and then make every new card part of the Straw Hat Alliance, and very few new cards Straw Hat Pirates, I don't know if that's going to work very well. Anyway, that's it for this video. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. I might just chatting shit. I am curious to see what you have to say. If you enjoyed this video, please do like it. Subscribe to the channel for more One Piece content, as well as Battle Spirits Saga content. And I hope to see you guys in the next video, or on my Patreon, which you can check in the link description. Cheers.